Today, options profiles. What we're going to be covering today is how to set up an options profile, then how we share that options profile with everybody in the office. It's one thing when you set up your own options profile, obviously the value comes when every preparer or anybody using TaxCycle within your office or even outside your office wants to connect and use those options to create a very consistent preparation experience. We'll be going over how to install an options profile that someone else has created for you, how to select a different options profile on startup. It may be in your particular practice that you have several different options profiles, perhaps configured with different e-file credentials or different pricing information depending on the types of returns you're working on. And the last couple of things we'll be covering today is how to secure your options profile or option profiles. There are several ways to do this depending on the complexity of your office. And lastly, the backups or how to make backups of your options profiles, just in case something goes wrong with an options profile after you've configured it, how to quickly recover it so you don't lose any settings. So I'm going to jump right in. I'll switch over to TaxCycle here. Actually, firstly, I should say everything I'm going to cover today is also relevant for TaxCycle. If you happen to use TaxCycle within your practice, it uses the same platform to share options and options profiles. So everything I'm going to cover today is applicable there. So now that I've come into TaxCycle, I'm going to open up my options dialog. I've in fact added the little spanner there on my quick access toolbar. The other way to access options is from directly here on the left hand side of the TaxCycle window. And that opens up our options dialog box for us. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger so we can fit more on screen. Just hide that share window. So as you can see, I've gone through here. I've set up some various contact information and so forth, configured my start screen and various other things using my local options profile. Every instance of TaxCycle has its own copy of options on each individual machine. So now what I want to do is I want to take this options profile as I've set it up and I want to share it with the other preparers in my office. So how do I go about doing that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this manage hyperlink at the top of the options window. That is going to open this little management view. This is where we can see all the various options profiles we have installed or referenced. And as we can see, I just have my local options profile on my machine. So we don't have to re-enter all of our options again. The management portal here has an option to clone. So what this will do is it will take all of my settings from my local options profile and create a new empty options profile with those values set for me. So I'm going to go ahead here and click clone. And this is going to walk me through the process of creating my options profile. So the first thing we want to do here is set whereabouts do I want my options profile to be. Now obviously within an office environment when there's a network involved, the best place to put your options profile is somewhere on your network. Now I have a particular network location already set up here on my machine. Let's make that a little bit bigger. I'll copy that. So I can simply browse to this location using the buttons here on the right hand side. I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to select this folder. So now what we have told TaxCycle to do, when we create a new options profile, we're going to put it in this network share. And then I'm going to go ahead and click next. The next thing we're going to do is give our options profile a name. Now options profile names have to be unique within that particular folder. We can't have two options profiles with the same name. So I'm going to go ahead and call this my office options. Next. So once I've set my name, the next thing we have to do is decide which pages of options are going to be included in my options profile. TaxCycle's options framework is very powerful. You can select particular options to include in the options profile that are shared amongst all the preparers, for example, client manager settings or pricing information. But you also have the option to deselect some option pages to say, each individual preparer can select or set these options themselves. It's not up for the office to decide what they want to set, and they can go ahead and set those. So obviously here in this example, I'm going to retain the contact and address because I want everybody that as I prepare my return to see that the organization is Trilogy Software. But as I scroll down here, say for example, the start screen, that's fairly personal. That's the start screen we see here. So I'm going to remove that from my options profile, and each individual preparer within the options can configure the start screen for how they want to see TaxCycle when they launch. I can go down and do a few other things. For example here, if you had different e-filer ID and passwords per preparer, you can simply remove the e-file accounts from the options profile. Or in this case, I'm going to keep that in there. I have one e-filer ID and password I like to use to transmit all of my returns. As we go down a bit further, the help usage, we can leave that up to the individual preparers, diagnostics, for example. If I come down to my T1 options, general, you know what, it's up to the individual preparer to see what color their particular forms are as they work through their TaxCycle file. So I'm going to take that out of the options profile. Elizabeth may prefer to prepare returns with blue forms. I may prefer to prepare returns with green forms for both my taxpayers, for example. So now that I've gone through and I've set what I want to include and exclude from my options profile, we can click next again. So finally, what we have here is we have an option to create an email containing details of this options profile we've just created. Rather than going around to everybody's machine and saying, look, I've created this options profile, I've put it in this network share, you need to go into TaxCycle and select it. We can have TaxCycle simply create an email that you can then send to the relevant preparers within your office. And that email will contain the exact instructions that, I've created an options profile called Office Options, and it's put into this network location, and this is how you install it. For this particular webinar, I'm going to deselect that, but that's how you would do it. And then I'm going to go ahead and create this options profile. So there we go. It has now created our Office Options profile. I'm going to go ahead and select that. You'll notice that my default options profile now is Office Options. And as we can see, it has retained the particular settings that we set when we created this options profile. Whilst we're still managing our options profiles, say for example, oops, I meant to actually exclude the preparer page from my options profile. Again, I would prefer that the individual preparers within my office put their own name and use their own signature file. We can always come back at any point and add or remove particular pages of options from my options profile. So they're not set in stone. You can tweak this as often as you like until you settle on the exact settings that you want in your options profile, or left up to the individual preparer to set. So I'll take that one out. And as you can see, without the checkbox, TaxCycle's also reminded me that this particular page of options is not included in the Office Options option profile. As I go further through here, again, perhaps I'd wish that I'd set an e-courier account. I can take that out of my options profile and let individual preparers set those options themselves. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. So now it's saved it. As we can see, we now have Office options that are referenced in our particular network location. If I simply collapse the management view, we'll go back into our regular view of options. Now, when you have an options profile selected, as we do now, just for quick reference, these options that have the green background or are highlighted with green, these are the options that are not in the options profile. So you can quickly scan through and determine which options are included and which options are not included. And again, like we started this process, we can click Manage. That will open this little management portal, and we can come through and make all the necessary changes again at any point in the future to our options profile. And we can even use this little list here. I can go and click on local, and this will reload all my local options. And I can simply go back and select my office options again, like that. So I just want to spend a few moments talking about these different buttons here. As we've seen, we already used the clone option to take an existing options profile and make a clone of that as the basis or starting point to create a new options profile. If I just wanted to create a new options profile that was blank, that didn't have anything in it, then I can obviously click the new option. As you can see, none of the options from the selected options profile have come forward. This is effectively a blank, fresh, clean view of options, and you can go through and set them all up again. I'm just going to back out of that. We have the options to reload our options. Remove. What remove does is it simply removes TaxCycle's reference to the options profile. It doesn't actually delete the options profile on disk. If I was to click remove here from Office Options, the Office Options profile I've created will remain here on my network share. It will be untouched, which is different to delete. Delete will not only remove the reference to the options profile from TaxCycle, it will also take the options profile that we see here on disk and move that to the recycle bin. It will completely delete it and all references to it from TaxCycle. So the next part of this particular process I wanted to talk about was if I've already created an options profile, I'll go ahead and close this dialog, and I want to use it. So say for example, the office administrator or the owner of my practice has already created the options for me, and I've just installed TaxCycle Fresh on my machine, and I may not have received the email earlier with instructions. How do I go about adding an options profile to my local copy of TaxCycle? So I'm just going to share my screen. Well, the easiest way to do that is if once you know the location of your options profile, as it is here shared on my network, you can simply take that options profile and drag it right onto TaxCycle. And I'm just going to let that go. So that is it. I have simply installed a reference to the Trilogy HQ options profile on my local copy of TaxCycle. We can see this in the top right hand corner in my list of options profiles. We can see that now Trilogy HQ is available to me to select and so forth. If I wasn't sure or I didn't want to drag and drop, of course we can simply use the browse option here, and that will open up a particular location of where we can select an options profile installed. Just simply select it. And lastly, if I open up the options window again, we do in fact have that same browse option here right at the top of our options profile dialog. And again, we can click browse. It will default this location to the last known options profile, and we can just go ahead, put that in screen and go ahead and open that. So that does bring me to the next part of this particular webinar. Is I want to be able to select, it's very well and good having these options profiles here, but I actually want to select my options profile on startup. So what we do here, this last item on my options profile list, we can select or deselect this particular option. So this will say, when I launch TaxCycle, I want you to present me with a list of all my options profiles, so Trilogy HQ, Office options, all my local options, and I will select which one I want to load for this particular session. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Just close TaxCycle. Relaunch it again. So now the TaxCycle is opened. It has now presented me with this particular dialog and given me the option of which options profile I want to use. So in this case, even though I've recently installed Trilogy HQ, I want to go back to my Office options. I can just simply double click or push select. Maximize that. And as we can see now, my active options profile is the Office options. If, for example, I'd selected the wrong options profile on startup, that's not a problem. At any point during your TaxCycle session, you can come to the options profile selection drop-down and we can change it. Perhaps I'll go back to Trilogy HQ. And as we can see, that has now loaded the Trilogy HQ options. One difference here is I have more returns in view and I'm not loading the news from this particular options profile. Our options apply almost instantly, so it's relatively quick and straightforward to switch between the different options as you're working through them. So the next part in this particular webinar I wanted to cover is how do I actually lock down my options. I want to secure them. Once I've set my options profile, I don't want anybody going in and inadvertently changing things or tweaking pricing or inadvertently doing something that they shouldn't have done. So the first mechanism we have, or first tool at our disposal, is if we open the options dialog. Down here in the bottom left-hand corner, we have this requirement, or we can set a requirement that a password is required before we show the options. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'm going to set a password. Okay. This does require administrative privileges of your machine, so we can go ahead and set that. Again, so someone doesn't inadvertently set an options password when they shouldn't have. Click yes, and just click OK. I'll close TaxCycle. I'll start it up again. It's one of that particular to take, so I'll pick my Trilogy one there. So now when I come and open my options, now that a password is set, I won't be able to actually access the options without first authenticating. So I'll go ahead and do that. I enter my password and now I have access to my options. I can go ahead and make changes as necessary. I'm just going to fire that off one more time. So if I open up my options dialog. Now, if you happen to have forgotten what your password is or you can't quite remember it, you can use the account you created with TaxCycle.com to authenticate or verify your identity. That allows you to bypass requiring to enter a password directly into TaxCycle. So you do have that as a backup in case you do lose access. So I'm going to go ahead, enter my password. And just to complete this, if you no longer wish to have a password to open options, we use the same mechanism we did to remove it as we did to add it. So I'm just simply going to go ahead and click remove the options password. Again, like when I set a password, I need administrative privileges of this machine to do that. Go ahead and click yes. And now the requirement for a password has gone. Come back into options, and my options will just show without me needing to authenticate first. Now that is the first mechanism we have to put some safeguards into protecting your options once you've set them. The next thing I'm going to show is actually working with the options profile zip file itself. If I open up my network share here, all of our options profiles are in fact zip files. They are the industry standard zip files. You can open them up with WinZip or any other program you use to manage zip files. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here on the Trilogy HQ options profile is I'm going to go to its properties and I'm going to set this to read only. So I'm going to apply that and go OK. So effectively at a Windows level, I've said this particular options profile can't be edited. Now that's a pretty blanket approach. This will affect everybody that uses that options profile. I'm just going to go ahead. That does require a TaxCycle restart. So as I still have my prompt to select an options profile on startup, we can now see that the Trilogy HQ options profile is read-only. TaxCycle does respect that particular setting at a Windows level. So I will not be able to make changes to this options profile. If I open up my options window, we can see that all my boxes here are disabled and we get the warning to indicate that I'm unable to make any changes from this particular computer to this options profile. If I switch back to say Office Options, which is not read-only, I can make changes. Or if I switch back back to my Trilogy HQ. Again, it goes back to read-only. I can't make changes. Now that's a fairly blanket approach. The third option you can use is if your office uses a domain controller with Microsoft's Active Directory. At an Active Directory level, what we can do is set sharing and security properties on the folder itself where the options profile is kept. In that case, you can enable everyone within your office to have read-only access to this particular share. And then your local administrators within your office, they can have read-write permissions. So they will be able to go in and make changes to this particular zip file when it's loaded in TaxCycle. So we do respect that. We work with what you've set at the Windows file system level. Again, using either Active Directory or the more brute force approach of just simply making this file read-only. Of course, I can simply deselect the read-only to make it editable again if I want to do that, make changes later in the future. Okay, so we've covered off there how we can put some security measures around either editing our options at a TaxCycle level or actually using the Windows file system or Active Directory to set a more sophisticated read-write permissions on my options profile zip. The last topic I wanted to cover today was the backups of your options profiles. So if I click OK, in fact, I might just click View Files here to quickly jump me into that folder, which here it is. So you may or may not have noticed already that when I make a change to an options profile zip, TaxCycle will automatically create a backup for you. TaxCycle will create 5 concurrent backups. So once you make a 6th edit to your options profile, the oldest one is removed. So we keep running 5 backups currently. Even though the file extension on my machine is unrecognized as a zip back, it is in fact a zip file. I simply rename it. And if I double click on that, we can see the contents of the Trilogy HQ zip file as of the 18th of January at 8 o'clock in the morning. And there we go. All options profiles are standard zip files. We can go in there and we can recover that one. So I might go in. I'll go to Office Options because I can't make changes there. And I might say it's Trilogy. Make a quick change. Apply. And as we can see, after I clicked Apply or OK, there's now a second Office Options backup created. Again, TaxCycle will automatically create these backups for you. You don't need to turn that on yourself. And we keep 5 backups of your options profiles at once. So that should at least enable you to go back through several edits in case you need to recover your options profile from a particular point in time. So that covers the various topics that I wanted to cover today in this webinar. Hopefully, if you're new to TaxCycle, you've learned how to share your options with the other preparers in your office. Or if you're more familiar or more of a power TaxCycle user, perhaps you've learned a couple of little things that you can do to make sharing your options profiles a bit smoother for you in your particular practice. I would say, just to finish off, if you want more help, we can go to taxcycle.com/options profiles. We have a host of information there online that goes through the particular topics that I've covered today in a bit more detail with more step-by-step guides if you wish to review that. But other than that, that is all I have for today. Again, thank you for attending to today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thank you so much.